I never imagined the moment that would break me would come wrapped in laughter. One careless word at a family dinner was all it took to expose what I had been for years. Something useful, something tolerated, something quietly taken for granted. In that instant, I realized I was not seen as a mother, a woman, or a person with dreams. I was a burden. And what hurt most was not the word itself, but the truth hiding behind it. That night, something inside me cracked. And from that crack, a completely new life began. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Holloway, though most people have always called me Maggie. I am 62 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that being needed was the same as being valued. I used to think that if I kept giving, kept adjusting, kept placing everyone else first, love would naturally follow. It took me decades to understand how wrong I was. Every morning in my daughter's house began the same way. I woke before sunrise, long before Vanessa or her husband stirred. The kitchen was always quiet at that hour, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the faint blue light from the window. I made coffee, packed lunches, wiped down counters that no one noticed, and reminded myself that this was what a good mother did. I had done it for years. I did it without complaint. Before I became mom and grandma, I was a nurse at a community hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I worked long shifts, sometimes 16 hours straight, caring for strangers who trusted me with their lives. I loved that work. It made me feel capable and respected. When my husband Robert became ill, I left the hospital without hesitation. Someone had to care for him. Someone had to hold everything together. That someone was me. For 10 years, I watched his strength fade while mine was expected to remain unbreakable. I managed medications, appointments, insurance forms, and sleepless nights. When he passed away, quietly, on a winter morning, I stood in our bedroom and realized I had forgotten how to live for myself. Vanessa invited me to move in with her and Ethan soon after. She said it would be easier for all of us. I believed her. I sold my small house, packed away decades of memories, and followed her to the suburbs outside Chicago, hoping we would grow closer. Instead, I slowly disappeared. My room was a converted storage space with one narrow window. My clothes fit into half a closet. My books were stacked in boxes that never quite found a place. I learned to move softly through the house, careful not to interrupt their routines. I cooked, cleaned, ran errands, and watched the clock so I would not be in anyone's way. At dinner, conversations flowed around me. Decisions were made without my input. Vacations, renovations, finances, schedules, all planned as if I were furniture. Useful, but silent. I told myself it was normal. I told myself I was lucky to have family. Sometimes, late at night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her shoulders were rounded. Her eyes looked tired. Her voice, once confident, had learned to apologize before speaking. There were small signs I ignored: Vanessa's impatience, Ethan's distant politeness, the way money was discussed in front of me as if it did not concern me. I convinced myself it was nothing. I had spent my life smoothing over discomfort. This was no different. But beneath my calm surface, something was shifting. I felt hollow in my own home. I had given everything to belong, and somehow I still felt like a guest. I did not know it then, but this quiet emptiness was the beginning of everything that followed. If you're still watching and starting to feel the weight of everything I gave up, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. What happened next would make me question everything I thought I knew about my own family. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. The morning of Ethan's birthday dinner began with me standing in front of my small closet, staring at rows of neatly folded clothes that no longer felt like they belonged to me. Most of them were years old, softened by countless washes and careful mending. I ran my fingers along the sleeves, searching for something that might help me blend in, something that would not make me look like the odd piece in a polished room. In the end, I chose a simple navy dress and the pale blue scarf I had owned for over a decade. It was still in good condition, and I told myself that was enough. I wrapped Ethan's gift carefully at the kitchen table while the house was still quiet. It was a leather planner, something practical, something he had once mentioned in passing. I had saved for weeks to buy it. As I folded the paper, I felt a small, hopeful flutter in my chest. Maybe tonight, I thought, I would feel like I truly belonged. By early evening, we were driving toward downtown Chicago, the skyline glowing against the darkening sky. The restaurant sat on a busy corner, all glass windows and soft golden lights. Inside, everything shimmered. Crystal glasses lined the shelves. Candles flickered between white plates. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted herbs. Laughter rose and fell like music. Vanessa's friends and colleagues were already there, dressed in tailored suits and elegant dresses. They spoke easily about business trips, market trends, and vacations in places I had only seen in magazines. I smiled when they looked my way, nodded when appropriate, and kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. No one asked me about my life. No one seemed curious. When the main courses were cleared, Vanessa stood to make a short toast. She looked confident and radiant under the soft lights, every inch the successful woman she had worked so hard to become. She thanked everyone for coming, for supporting Ethan, for being part of their journey. The room responded with warm applause. Then, with a playful smile, she added that life was not always perfect, especially with extra responsibilities at home. She gestured lightly in my direction and said that sometimes her mother could be a bit of a burden, but that she loved me anyway. The word landed in the center of my chest like a stone dropped into water. For a moment, I did not breathe. The sounds around me blurred into a distant hum. Then laughter erupted, bright, effortless, unquestioning. Ethan chuckled beside her. Someone raised a glass. Another guest covered her mouth, still smiling. I felt my face grow warm. My ears rang. I stared at the delicate pattern on my plate, afraid that if I looked up, I might shatter. Part of me wanted to stand, to say something, to defend myself. But another part, the stronger part, the one trained by years of silence, kept me seated. I forced a smile. I lifted my glass and took a slow sip of water, using the movement to hide the tremor in my hands. No one noticed, or maybe they did and chose not to care. The conversation shifted quickly. Stock prices, a new condo, a weekend getaway. My name was no longer part of it. After a few minutes, I excused myself and walked toward the restroom, though I did not go inside. Instead, I stood near the window, watching cars pass in the streaks of white and red. The city looked vast and indifferent. I pressed my palm against the cool glass and tried to steady myself. On the walk back to our table, the word repeated in my mind: burden, burden, burden. By the time we left the restaurant, I was quieter than usual. No one asked why. That night, lying in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. I had always feared becoming invisible. Now I understood that, to them, I already was. If you're still watching, and that one word shocked you as much as it shocked me, please comment number 2 below to let me know you're with me, because what I discovered afterward was far more painful than any joke. Now, let's move on to chapter 3. In the days that followed Ethan's birthday dinner, I moved through the house like a shadow. I still woke before everyone else. I still made coffee, folded laundry, and wiped down counters that never stayed clean for long. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, however, the word burden echoed through my thoughts like a slow, steady drumbeat. It followed me from room to room. It slipped into my dreams and greeted me when I opened my eyes. Sleep became shallow and restless. Some nights, I lay awake listening to the soft hum of traffic outside and wondered when I had become so easy to dismiss. Other nights, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the laughter at the restaurant, trying to convince myself it had meant nothing. I failed every time. One quiet afternoon, while Vanessa and Ethan were both at work, I sat alone at the kitchen table with my old checkbook and a stack of unopened bank statements. I had not reviewed my finances carefully in years. There had never seemed to be a reason. I trusted my daughter. I trusted my family. That trust had always felt natural, almost automatic. I opened the first envelope slowly, smoothing the paper flat with my palm. My eyes moved down the page, scanning familiar numbers. At first, everything looked normal. Then I reached the final balance. It was far lower than I expected. I frowned and checked the date. Then I checked another statement, and another. With each page, the same pattern appeared. Withdrawals, transfers, large amounts disappearing in quiet, steady increments. My chest tightened. I tried to calculate the totals in my head, hoping I had made a mistake. I had not. My hands began to tremble as I walked to the hallway closet where I kept my personal documents. Birth certificates, insurance policies, medical records, old tax forms. Everything was neatly labeled in faded folders. I pulled them out one by one and spread them across the dining table. After nearly an hour of searching, I found it. A power of attorney form, clipped between medical paperwork from a hospital stay 2 years earlier. I stared at it in disbelief. My name was printed clearly at the top. So was Vanessa's. According to the document, I had granted her full authority over my financial affairs. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be mine. It was not. It looked similar, close enough to pass a casual glance, but wrong in ways only I would notice. The curve of the M, the slant of the G, the pressure of the pen. It felt like looking at my reflection in distorted glass. My stomach twisted. I sat down heavily in the nearest chair and closed my eyes. Memories rushed back. That hospital stay, the exhaustion, the medication that left me foggy and disoriented. Vanessa had handled everything then. Appointments, forms, insurance calls. I had been grateful. I had been vulnerable. And someone had taken advantage of that. With shaking fingers, I logged into my online banking account and scrolled through the transaction history. The names of unfamiliar accounts appeared again and again. Several were linked to Ethan's business. Payments labeled as temporary loans, operational support, emergency transfers. None of it had been temporary. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was not carelessness. This was calculated, quiet, deliberate. For a long time, I sat in silence, surrounded by paper evidence of my own misplaced faith. I felt foolish. I felt betrayed. I felt older than I ever had before. Yet beneath the pain, something else began to form. clarity. I realized that the laughter at the restaurant had not been an isolated moment. It was part of a pattern, a reflection of how little my voice mattered, how easily my life could be rearranged without my consent. I gathered the documents into a single folder and placed them carefully in my drawer. I did not confront anyone that day. Not yet. I needed time. I needed strength. And most of all, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against, because now I knew the truth, and it had changed everything. If you're still watching, and you're starting to realize how deep this betrayal really goes, please comment number 3 below to let me know you're with me. What I confronted next nearly destroyed what little trust I had left. Now, let's move on to chapter 4. For 3 days after I discovered the power of attorney document, I said nothing. I moved through the house with the folder hidden beneath my sweaters, tucked away in the back of my drawer as if it might burn me if I looked at it too often. Each morning, I told myself that there had to be a reasonable explanation, a misunderstanding, a mistake, something that would allow me to keep believing in my daughter the way I always had. I rehearsed conversations in my head while washing dishes and folding clothes. I practiced calm voices and gentle questions. I reminded myself that anger would only make things worse. More than anything, I was afraid of losing what little peace remained between us. On the 4th evening, I decided I could not wait any longer. Vanessa and Ethan were both home, sitting at the kitchen counter with their laptops open, glasses of wine beside them. The television murmured softly in the background. It looked like an ordinary night. That almost made it harder. I placed 3 plates on the table and served dinner slowly, buying myself time. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain they could hear it. When we finally sat down, I folded my hands in my lap and took a steady breath. I told them I had been reviewing my bank statements. I mentioned that some numbers did not make sense. I said I had found a document I did not remember signing. My voice stayed even, careful, almost apologetic. Vanessa frowned and glanced at Ethan. He shifted in his seat. She said something about helping me manage things when I was sick, about how I had been overwhelmed back then, about how they were only trying to make life easier for me. Her words were quick and well practiced, sliding neatly into place. Ethan added that his business had gone through a difficult period, that the transfers were temporary, that everything would be repaid soon. He spoke calmly, as if explaining a minor inconvenience. I listened, I nodded, then I asked if I could see the paperwork, the loan agreements, the repayment schedule, anything that showed a clear plan. The room changed. Ethan's jaw tightened. Vanessa's shoulders stiffened. She asked why I did not trust her, why I was acting like a stranger, why I always assumed the worst. I tried to explain that trust required honesty, that I only wanted clarity, that I was scared. My words seemed to dissolve before reaching them. Vanessa accused me of being dramatic. She said I was creating problems where none existed. She reminded me of how much they had done for me, how they had given me a place to live, how they had taken care of me after my husband died. Ethan said I did not understand how modern business worked, that I was stuck in the past, that questioning him in his own home was disrespectful. Their voices grew sharper. Mine grew quieter. Suddenly, I felt like I was 12 years old again, standing in front of an authority I was not allowed to challenge. Every sentence I spoke was turned against me. Every concern was reframed as ingratitude. I looked from my daughter to her husband and realized neither of them was listening. They were defending themselves, not considering me. Dinner grew cold on our plates. The television continued murmuring, indifferent to everything unraveling at the table. Eventually, Vanessa stood up and began clearing dishes with unnecessary force. She said she was tired of constant negativity. She said I was ruining the atmosphere in the house. I sat there long after they left the room. The folder in my drawer felt heavier than ever. That night, lying awake in my narrow bed, I understood something painful and undeniable. No one was going to protect me here. If I wanted safety, dignity, and truth, I would have to fight for them myself. If you're still watching and feeling how alone I was in that moment, please comment number 4 below to let me know you're with me, because what happened next pushed me to my absolute breaking point. Now, let's move on to chapter 5. By the time my body finally gave in, I had been running on exhaustion for weeks. Sleep no longer came easily. When it did, it was shallow and restless, filled with fractured dreams and sudden awakenings. My appetite disappeared. Some days, I survived on nothing more than coffee and a piece of toast. My hands shook when I tried to pour water. My head throbbed constantly, as if warning me that something inside was beginning to break. I ignored every sign. I told myself I was just tired. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself that strong women did not fall apart. One afternoon, as I stood in the kitchen rinsing a plate, the room tilted without warning. The light above me blurred into a pale haze. My knees weakened, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor, staring at the underside of the counter, unable to move. I woke up in a hospital bed. The ceiling was white. The sheets smelled faintly of antiseptic. A monitor beeped softly beside me. For a moment, I thought I was back at work, standing at the foot of someone else's bed, clipboard in hand. Then memory returned, heavy and sharp. A nurse explained that I had collapsed from severe exhaustion and dehydration. My blood pressure was dangerously low. My body, she said gently, had reached its limit. I stayed in that room for 2 days. Vanessa did not come. Neither did Ethan. They sent a brief text asking if I was stable. I replied that I was. That was the end of the conversation. The hours passed slowly. Sunlight crawled across the wall and retreated again. Nurses changed shifts. Meals arrived on plastic trays and went mostly untouched. At night, the hospital settled into a strange, hollow quiet that made every thought echo louder. On the second afternoon, my old friend Claire called. We had worked together years ago at the hospital, back when I still wore scrubs and believed in steady routines. Her voice sounded hesitant, as if she were choosing her words carefully. She told me she had seen a real estate listing online. My address was on it. At first, I thought she must be mistaken. She sent me the link. There it was. Photographs of my living room, my kitchen, my bedroom, my life, reduced to polished images and cheerful descriptions. Well-maintained property. Move-in ready. Motivated sellers. Vanessa's name was on the paperwork. My hands went numb. With trembling fingers, I contacted the real estate agency from my hospital bed. The agent confirmed everything politely, professionally. The house had been listed the previous week. A buyer was already interested. The sale was meant to close quickly. When I asked why, the truth emerged in fragments. Ethan's business was collapsing. Loans had piled up. Investors were withdrawing. They needed money immediately. My house was their solution. They had not told me because, as the agent put it carefully, they assumed it would be easier that way. I ended the call and stared at the blank wall. For a long time, I felt nothing. Then everything crashed down at once. The laughter at the restaurant, the forged document, the arguments, the silence, the absence at my hospital bed, all of it merged into a single, devastating realization. I had never been a partner in their lives. I had been a resource, a safety net. Something to be used quietly and discarded when inconvenient. Tears came then, deep and uncontrollable, not loud, not dramatic, just endless and exhausting. I cried for the woman I had been, for the years I had given away, for the trust I had offered so freely. When the tears finally stopped, something else took their place. Stillness, clarity, resolve. Lying in that narrow hospital bed, weaker than I had ever felt, I made myself a promise. No one would ever take from me like this again. Not my money, not my home, not my dignity, and not my future. For the first time in months, I did not feel afraid, felt ready. I was discharged from the hospital on a gray Tuesday morning, carrying a small paper bag with my medications and a stack of instructions folded neatly inside. My body still felt fragile, as if one wrong step might cause everything to collapse again. Yet, beneath the lingering weakness, my mind had never been clearer. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Instead of going straight home, I asked a taxi driver to take me to a law office near the medical center. I had searched for the number the night before, scrolling through legal directories until my eyes blurred. When I walked inside, leaning slightly on my cane, I felt strangely calm. The attorney listened without interrupting as I laid out every detail: the forged power of attorney, the missing money, the house listing, the hospital stay. I placed my folder on his desk and opened it slowly, showing him copies of every document I had gathered. He examined them carefully. What I had suspected was confirmed. My rights had been violated. Within hours, paperwork was in motion. The fraudulent authorization was revoked. My bank accounts were secured. Access was restricted. Passwords were changed. Alerts were activated. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been quietly stolen. Over the next week, I moved with deliberate purpose. I visited the bank in person and spoke to a manager. I transferred funds into new accounts. I closed old lines of access. I contacted the real estate agency and demanded an immediate halt to the sale. Legal notices were sent. The listing was removed. No one could pretend anymore. When I finally returned to Vanessa's house, I did not unpack my suitcase. I sat at the kitchen table and told them what I had done. My voice did not shake. I did not raise it either. I explained that the power of attorney was revoked, that the accounts were protected, that the house was no longer for sale, that my lawyer would be handling all future communication. Vanessa stared at me in disbelief. Ethan's face hardened. They accused me of betrayal, of overreacting, of destroying their stability. They said I was choosing money over family. I listened. Then I told them I was choosing dignity, that I was choosing honesty, that I was choosing myself. There was nothing dramatic in my tone, no anger left to burn, only certainty. That night, I packed quietly. 2 suitcases, a small box of personal items, photographs, letters, my nursing certificate. A worn notebook filled with thoughts I had never shared. I left behind furniture, decorations, dishes, things that no longer felt like mine. Before dawn, I drove south. I did not know exactly where I would end up, only that I needed distance, space, air. After hours on the highway, with the sunlight rising slowly behind me, I felt something loosen in my chest. 2 weeks later, I signed the papers on a small bungalow in St. Petersburg, Florida. It had pale walls, wide windows, and a narrow porch shaded by palm trees. The ocean was only a short walk away. The neighborhood was quiet. The air smelled faintly of salt and flowers. It was not grand. It was peaceful. I furnished it simply: a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf. Nothing excessive, nothing borrowed. I kept limited contact with Vanessa after that. Short messages, necessary updates, no late night confessions, no emotional bargaining. Boundaries I had never known how to build before now stood firmly in place. In the evenings, I sat on my porch and watched the sky fade into soft shades of pink and gold. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with warm coastal air. For decades, I had lived as someone's support system. Now, for the first time, I was standing on my own, and I was not afraid. If you're still watching and proud of the strength it took to walk away, please comment number 6 below to let me know you're with me. But leaving was only the beginning of a much bigger transformation. Now, let's move on to chapter 7. My first weeks in St. Petersburg felt like stepping into someone else's life. Every morning, sunlight poured through my bedroom window long before my alarm sounded. It was softer than the harsh gray light I had known in Chicago, filtered through the palm leaves and drifting clouds. At first, I lay still and listened to unfamiliar sounds, distant waves, early birds, the low hum of traffic along the coast. It reminded me that I was somewhere new, somewhere that did not carry the weight of my past. I unpacked slowly, one box at a time, giving each object careful consideration. I arranged my books on a narrow shelf near the window. I placed framed photographs on a small table, choosing only a few that brought comfort rather than pain. I hung light curtains that moved gently in the ocean breeze. Nothing was extravagant. Everything was intentional. Each morning, I walked along the quiet streets with a cup of coffee in my hand, learning the rhythm of the neighborhood. Retirees watered their gardens, couples walked their dogs, shop owners swept sidewalks and waved politely. No one knew my history. No one expected anything from me. That anonymity felt like a gift. One afternoon, while I was struggling to position a heavy planter near my porch, a woman with silver hair and bright eyes crossed the street toward me. She introduced herself as Helen and offered to help. We talked easily, as if we had known each other for years. She told me about local farmers markets and library events. I told her I was new and grateful for the kindness. She smiled and said that everyone needed a soft landing place. A few days later, I met Carlos when he came to repair a loose section of my fence. He worked quietly, carefully measuring and adjusting each board. We exchanged simple pleasantries. He noticed my old nursing pin hanging on a hook near the door and asked about it with genuine curiosity. For once, someone seemed interested in my story. Gradually, my days filled with small, meaningful routines. I volunteered twice a week at a nearby assisted living center, helping residents organize medications and accompanying them to appointments. The familiar rhythm of care returned to me, not as obligation, but as choice. I felt useful again in a way that did not drain me. In the afternoons, I painted by the window, experimenting with colors inspired by the sea and sky. Some canvases were clumsy, others surprised me. I wrote in my journal each night, tracing my emotions with the honesty I had once denied myself. With each passing week, my confidence grew. Neighbors invited me for tea. Volunteers asked for my advice. Helen often stopped by with fresh bread or cut flowers. Slowly, I stopped introducing myself as Vanessa's mother or Robert's wife. I was simply Maggie. There were still difficult moments. Occasionally, I woke from dreams of hospital corridors and cold dining rooms. Sometimes, guilt crept in, whispering that I had abandoned my family. But instead of listening, I learned to breathe through it, to remind myself why I had left, to forgive the woman I had been when she did not know better. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun sink into the Gulf, the sky painted in shades of amber and lavender, I realized something quietly extraordinary. I was not waiting for anyone. I was not performing. I was not shrinking. For the first time in my adult life, I felt rooted in my own existence. This small bungalow, with its creaking floors and salty air, had become more than a shelter. It had become my home. And in that realization, I sensed that I was finally ready for whatever came next. By the time the story reached me, my life in St. Petersburg had settled into a quiet, predictable rhythm. My mornings began with walks along the shoreline. My afternoons were filled with volunteering and painting. My evenings belonged to books, soft music, and the steady comfort of routine. For the first time in years, I felt emotionally stable. I was no longer bracing myself for disappointment. That calm was interrupted on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Helen knocked on my door, her expression unusually serious. She held her tablet in both hands, as if it were something fragile. Without a word, she showed me the screen. An article filled the page. It mentioned Ethan's company. It spoke of falsified records, misused funds, and misleading investors. Government agencies were investigating. Several accounts had been frozen. Lawsuits were forming. I read slowly, my fingers tightening around the edge of the device. Though I had prepared myself for the possibility, seeing it in print made everything real. Over the following days, more reports surfaced. Business journals, local news stations, online forums. Each story added new details. Ethan's financial network had been built on the unstable promises. Money had been shuffled between accounts to hide losses. Some of it, I recognized, had once belonged to me. Vanessa's name appeared soon after. She had resigned from her marketing firm. Sources described internal conflicts and ethical concerns. Old photographs of her began circulating. Comment sections filled with speculation. For weeks, I said nothing. I continued watering my plants. I attended volunteer meetings. I painted sunsets and ocean waves. I tried to protect the fragile peace I had built. Then my phone rang. It was a reporter from a local television station. She said she had read court documents mentioning my case. She knew about the forged power of attorney, the attempted sale of my house, the hospital incident. She wanted to hear my side. I thanked her and ended the call. That night, I could not sleep. I paced my living room, listening to the ceiling fan turn in slow circles. Part of me wanted to remain invisible. I had spent a lifetime learning how to disappear. Speaking publicly felt dangerous. Exposing old wounds felt unnecessary. But another part of me, stronger now, whispered that silence was what had allowed everything to happen in the first place. I thought about the women I met at the assisted living center, widows, caregivers, mothers who had sacrificed everything and trusted the wrong people. I thought about how easily they could become invisible, too. The next morning, I called the reporter back. The interview took place in a modest studio downtown. Bright lights, neutral walls, a glass of water on a small table. I wore a simple blouse and my favorite silver necklace, the one I had kept through every move. I spoke calmly. I did not accuse. I did not exaggerate. I told the truth. I described my illness, the forged document, the missing money, the pain of realizing my family had acted without my consent. I spoke about boundaries, about self-respect, about starting over at 62. When it aired, I watched alone from my sofa. I barely recognized the woman on the screen. She looked composed, grounded, unafraid. The response was overwhelming. Letters arrived at my door. Emails filled my inbox. Strangers thanked me for giving them courage. Some shared their own stories. Others simply wrote, "You helped me feel less alone." For the first time, my voice carried beyond my small porch and quiet routines. It mattered. As I stood that evening watching the sunset set stain the sky in brilliant orange, I understood something new. My story no longer belonged only to me, and I was finally ready to face whatever came next. If you're still watching and amazed by how everything finally came to light, please comment number 8 below to let me know you're with me, because what happened next would determine whether this story ended in heartbreak or healing. Now, let's move on to the final chapter. Fame, even in its smallest and most local form, is a strange thing. It arrives quietly, settles into corners of your life, and then waits to see how you will respond. After the interview aired, I began to notice subtle changes in the way people looked at me. Strangers at the grocery store smiled longer. Volunteers at the assisted living center thanked me with unusual warmth. Neighbors asked thoughtful questions about my story. Yet inside my little bungalow, nothing truly changed. I still made my tea the same way. I still watered my plants every evening. I still preferred silence to noise. I had no desire to become someone else. Then, one Saturday morning, my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter while I was slicing fruit for breakfast. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I simply stared at it. We had exchanged only brief, necessary messages since my move. Polite, distant, carefully controlled. Seeing her name unexpectedly felt like opening a door I had spent months learning how to keep closed. Her message was short. She asked if we could meet. She said she would be in Florida for a conference. She said she wanted to talk. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was clear. Pelicans glided above the water. The world looked calm, indifferent to my uncertainty. Part of me wanted to ignore the message. Silence had protected me before. It could do so again. Another part, quieter but persistent, reminded me that avoiding difficult conversations had once cost me everything. After several hours of reflection, I replied. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near the beach, halfway between her hotel and my home. Neutral territory. Public. Safe. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early and chose a table facing the ocean. The salty breeze carried the sound of waves and distant laughter. I ordered tea and waited. When Vanessa walked in, I almost did not recognize her. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her posture, once confident and commanding, seemed hesitant. She scanned the room nervously before spotting me. She approached slowly and sat down. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she began. Her words came in uneven fragments. She spoke of pressure, of expectations, of comparing herself to colleagues and online successes, of feeling trapped in a life she had built for appearances. She admitted she had been afraid of failing, afraid of being ordinary, afraid of disappointing everyone, including me. She confessed that in her fear, she had convinced herself that controlling everything was necessary, even me. When she apologized, it was awkward and incomplete. Her voice trembled. She stumbled over phrases. There was no perfect speech, no dramatic declaration, only raw honesty struggling to find shape. I listened. I did not interrupt. I did not defend myself. I let her speak until her words ran out. When she finished, she looked at me with quiet desperation, as if waiting for a verdict. I told her that I accepted her apology, but I also told her that forgiveness did not mean returning to the old patterns. I explained that I would not live under her roof again, that I would not surrender control of my life, that our relationship could continue only if it was built on respect and transparency. She nodded slowly. There were tears in her eyes, but there was understanding too. We walked out of the cafe together, side by side without touching. No promises were made, no illusions were offered. But for the first time in years, we parted as two adults, not as a caretaker and a dependent. And that I realized was enough. Life did not become perfect after Vanessa and I spoke by the ocean. There were no sudden transformations, no dramatic apologies repeated every day, no fairy tale endings. What came instead was something quieter and far more valuable: balance. My days in St. Petersburg continued in their gentle rhythm. I woke early, brewed my tea, and sat on the porch while the sun slowly climbed above the palm trees. Some mornings, Helen joined me with fresh pastries. Other times, I sat alone, listening to the wind move through the leaves and feeling grateful for the silence. It was no longer an empty silence. It was chosen. Vanessa and I learned how to speak to each other again, carefully and honestly. We exchanged messages once or twice a week. Sometimes we talked about work, sometimes about books, sometimes about nothing at all. We avoided old patterns. We respected each other's boundaries. Our relationship was no longer built on obligation, but on mutual recognition. With Helen's encouragement, I helped organize a small support group at the local community center. We met every Thursday afternoon in a bright room with wide windows and folding chairs arranged in a circle. Women came with stories similar to mine: years of sacrifice, quiet disappointment, forgotten dreams. Together, we spoke about finances, legal rights, self-respect, and emotional recovery. More than anything, we reminded each other that it was never too late to begin again. I also began writing. At first, it was only in my journal. Then slowly, the pages grew into chapters. I wrote about nursing, motherhood, marriage, loss, and reinvention. I wrote about fear and courage, about silence and voice. Through those words, I learned to forgive myself for staying too long in places that no longer honored me. Looking back, I no longer felt anger. I saw my younger self clearly now, a woman who loved deeply and believed that love required self-erasure. She had done her best with what she knew. That was enough. In the evenings, I often walked to the shoreline and watched the horizon melt into shades of gold and violet. The world felt wide again. Possibility no longer frightened me. One night, sitting at my desk beneath a warm lamp, I wrote a sentence in careful ink and underlined it twice. I was never a burden. I was carrying everyone else. I closed the notebook and smiled. Outside, the porch light glowed softly against the dark. Inside, I finally felt at home. Sometimes, the hardest journeys are not measured in miles, but in courage. They are shaped by quiet choices, by moments when a person finally decides to stop shrinking and start standing. This story reminds us that love does not require self-erasure, and loyalty does not mean surrendering dignity. True strength is learning when to give and when to protect your own heart. It is understanding that starting over is not failure, but wisdom. No matter the age, no matter the past, every life holds space for renewal, growth, and self-respect. If this story touched you, inspired you, or reflected something in your own life, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Do not forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more meaningful stories. Thank you for being part of this journey.